Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and what I've got in my sights for today are these two yellow buckets that you see down here on the ground. They're a couple of 21-day-old systems in which we've got African nightcrawlers living. And when we first launched the systems 3 weeks ago, we sort of pre-fed the bins, so the food was already in there waiting for the worms to arrive, and then 12 days passed between the launch and the second feeding. And now, 9 days later, I believe they are due for another feeding, because that last feeding they got 9 days ago was pretty skimpy. But before we could really sort of turn our backs and forget about the parent system from which those worms were taken, we still need to haul out the stragglers, because we removed the worms to launch those two buckets, and then we actually consolidated the material that had been in those two bins that those worms came from into this one single system here, so that we can initiate a bait station to see if we could arrange a final haul out of the worms. So the only bait that I really used was wet bedding, and then I came back in here 10 days ago or 11 days ago. I think it was 10 days after the setup of the bait stations, so 11 days ago, to sprinkle in a little bit of worm chow. And I'd like to see if perhaps we can consider this baiting of the stragglers as complete. So we're going to get this system up onto the bench, check out how the bait station's doing, but more importantly, check out how the material is doing as far as stragglers. If there's no more stragglers remaining, the baiting will be complete. And then we'll reunite the stragglers with the rest of the worms that got hauled out 3 weeks ago when we get in here to feed the buckets. And the buckets are going to get fed big because I got a lot of food for them. So let's go ahead and get the baiting set up on the bench and see how that's doing, and then we'll get back to these two buckets momentarily. When I peeked in here just yesterday, I lifted off the plastic cover to see what was happening. I did notice some worms that had come up for the moisture that tends to collect up on the plastic, and there were some worms cruising the top surface, but at the moment I don't even see one, which is a little bit strange. Well, not strange, whatever. It is what it is. I'm not going to sweat it. But before we can consider this as a completed baiting or completed extraction of the stragglers, I believe there's the matter of just confirming how the material itself looks. And I usually think that the best bet is to simply remove the bait station and then to search the area closest to the bait station to see if any worms were kind of on the verge of getting up into the bait station but were not yet there. Because sometimes I do find a couple that are not quite there yet, you know, near the bait station. But we may not see any because this material has gotten pretty dry. I mean, maybe if we were to go down a little bit deeper, maybe some worms just sort of following their instincts and diving down deep, but I've so far not seen a single worm, and I wasn't going to go on some sort of grand manhunt to try to find anything I can find. I'm already kind of getting that sense that we can probably consider this batch of vermicompost as entirely depopulated. Because I think that if we didn't find anything right below the bait box, out here in the edges where there's been really nothing protecting that material from further drying, it seems even less likely that we would find any. But I think just to be fair and just to be thorough, which I like to be thorough, perhaps we can just take a quick probe down into the depths of the material. And, well, how do you like that? I always get to be proven wrong. There's a worm right there, and I thought I even saw another one. 2 worms so far, down in the deepest reaches of the material. I believe I'm going to set this off to the side briefly. And I guess now, just for the sake of being thorough, I guess I'm going to till up the bottom of this container to see if we can easily nab just a few more stragglers. But like I said before, I don't really want to go on some sort of extensive search for stragglers at this point. Any worms that, you know, didn't really make it into the bait station at this point are going to be very few and far between, if you ask me. And I guess to a certain point, as long as I get around to using this material out in the garden soon, then they might even, you know, end up being rewarded with some freedom outside of my wormery, out in the garden, out in the great outdoors. So I always like to try to paint a picture with a bright side, try to be the optimist, with the cup being halfway full rather than halfway empty. And any stragglers left behind are not just worms that are going to be left to starve and be stranded on their own, but rather they'll be rewarded by being freed out into the garden. And over here in this corner, I'm finding even more. So I've definitely already individually picked out probably a dozen or more worms already. And it almost did seem to me like there was a little pocket of moisture. The stuff that I extracted were little, you know, little clumps of stuff that do seem to be little pockets of lingering moisture holding the castings material together. But I really don't anticipate finding a whole lot more, but I think just to be fair and thorough, we're going to continue on with this sort of quick lap around the system to excavate the material down at the very bottom just to see what we can see. And as you can see, I'm definitely locating even more worms over here. And I'm not counting how many we've collected so far, but I'm now already starting to feel like perhaps we've reached a couple dozen. Here and there, still finding a worm. And I guess if they were extremely dehydrated, they would be very lethargic. These little guys do seem sort of lively, all things considered. So I think that's kind of a good sign that they're not really in extreme distress. I mean, they might be lonely because they're not surrounded by their brothers and sisters like it was when they were still living in their old containers 3 weeks ago, before we emptied them and consolidated them here into this one single bin. So I got to admit, I'm a little bit surprised at how many worms we're locating here down deep within the material. But I think all things considered, we did come up with some estimates for how many worms occupy those yellow buckets, and we came up with an estimate somewhere in the neighborhood of around 3,000 per bucket. So if you think of 6,000 worms being hauled out of the 2 parent containers from which all those worms were removed, a few dozen lingering behind is certainly just a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things, I believe. So I do feel like I need to sort of filter my tolerance for what I find here and not allow myself to go overboard on just spending all day here trying to pull out any stragglers I can find, because it does seem like if you were to go through this material and you would be extremely thorough, then you would keep finding worms. Here and there I do find these little tiny blue strips of material. Stuff that I used to find in a lot of my systems. It was some stuff that must have gotten tangled up in some of my bedding material once when I was running stuff through the shredder. It must have ended up there when it shouldn't have. It's just some sort of plastic, I believe, because I've never seen any signs of any of that stuff breaking down. So for months now I've been removing little strips of blue material out of my systems and out of my castings. And at this point I'm thinking this might be one of the last systems where we're going to see any of that stuff, because it's not really been showing up anywhere lately. But here it is. It's still showing up because I guess, let's see, what's the counter here? 300 and what is it? It was 365 It was 1 year's age when we decided it was time to do the haul out of the worms, and there was 21 days more, right? So I think we're at 386. It's a pretty easy number to remember if you're a computer person and you can think back to the late 80s. 386 was a type of computer chip. It was the main CPU in what was considered to be a pretty common computer back in the days. Went from 286 to 386. I guess I've been bringing up computer topics a lot lately in my past couple videos, like in my t-shirt feeding fabric composting test initiation the other day. I mentioned some IT things going back to the days when I was working in IT. So I feel like we've pretty much made a lap around this system, picking worms out individually one by one. And I'm sure that if we were to continue, we would certainly keep bumping into worms here and there. I guess every time I pull up a handful of material in which I notice more than just a single worm, I feel like I've got to go try to round up that little jumble of worms that appear to have huddled around some sort of little oasis of moisture that was still out there. But I do feel like the time has come to bring some sort of an official end to this 386-day-old batch of material with the final haul out of worms to be reunited with the original batch of worms that got hauled out of this stuff 3 weeks ago, and write this off as yet another batch of finished vermicompost. So, I don't know why. I always kind of get this feeling like I've told myself it's over, but I can't seem to resist trying to get one or two more worms. There I go, finding another little pocket that I unearthed that appeared to have more than 2 or 3 worms in it, so I feel like I'm going to try to get them out as well. But I really feel like I should, at this point, write off any more that we failed to extract at this point as worms that are just going to get to roam free out in my garden as soon as this material gets used to treat my plants. So not only will the plants be benefiting from some awesome African nightcrawler worm castings, the straggler worms that are still inhabiting this stuff will be set free out into the great outdoors to get some nice fresh air. And unfortunately the hazards that go hand in hand with being outdoors, such as predators and potentially rough weather. And yeah, I just can't seem to resist picking through this stuff and pulling out stragglers. Really didn't think we'd find so many, but we did manage to find a few, and they're right here on top. What we've not done, though, is we've not had a chance to actually look through the bait box to see what kind of a turnout it was able to get. So before we proceed, looks like this one little guy squirmed out of the bottom of the bait box out onto the plastic, and I'll be sure to check that later. But I am just curious at this point to pick through to see what kind of turnout the bait box was able to get us. The worms do like getting in between the layers of corrugated cardboard, so it's not surprising to find them in between the flutes of the corrugated cardboard. And these pieces of corrugated cardboard were utilized originally to arrange the horizontal migration feeding zones of the 2 systems from which the worms occupying the buckets were extracted. My thinking on using the bedding in this way was to have large chunks of material that I could potentially just uncrumble, because they're just little bundles of paper crumbled up into little balls. If I really, really wanted to, I'd be able to just, you know, kind of uncrumble these balls of newspaper, shake off whatever's on them, or whoever's on them, to get a really good unobstructed view of how many worms we managed to bait out of the material. But I'm not going to go too overboard. I'm really just doing this for the sake of being able to get a sense of just how many worms we were able to round up in this baiting effort. And I could see the wear on the paper too, you know. They've definitely done a job nibbling away on the paper. Because from a worm's perspective, paper is nothing more than wood pulp, which is certainly a viable food source for composting worms. I just sort of sprinkled in that worm chow 11 days ago for good measure, and just for the sake of possibly seeing a little bit more worm activity on the top surface when we were to get back in here to check on them. You could even see the castings that are beginning to pile up from the worms that have gathered in here. So not only do we get to see the worms, but perhaps another clue as to how many worms are in here is the amount of castings material that has accumulated from the worms being in here. So over here on this side, another chunk of cardboard, which I think that the worms are probably going to, in most cases, favor the cardboard, because the cardboard has some sort of a starchy adhesive that holds the layers together, which I believe is one of the main reasons you always find worms wanting to cruise around within the layers of cardboard to get at that starchy, sweet goodness. And they seem happy and healthy and lively, and all the material that I'm probing through to check them out is damp. So I believe that this bait station was a nice little oasis for the worms to come up and live in. I mean, for that matter, some of the worms that are in here are nice and plump. So I'm thinking that they're quite content to be in this material. But I think we've now had a chance to observe just how many worms have come together here. And there's about 100 worms difference in our estimates. We're the bucket number 1, I made a little annotation here on this piece of paper, so it's nothing fancy. It's not like my green information board, but you can see bucket number 2 is the one that's thought to have a slightly larger population of worms living in it by about 99. And I mean, according to the numbers, it's exactly 99, but I think it's always fair to just use the qualifier, you know, just to say about, because these are all estimates, so there's nothing to say that that's the exact number. These estimates are arrived at by me throwing my estimate into the hat, and then everyone else's estimates that I get in the comments. So these wormies, I believe, we're going to release them into bucket number 2, which is, bucket number 1, which is thought to be the lesser populated of the 2 buckets. So at this point, I think bucket number 2 might actually end up becoming the more heavily populated bucket. So since we've now had a chance to see the worms, and we'll have another chance to see them when we release them, but I would love to hear everyone's thoughts in the comments as to how many worms are being released into bucket number 1, so that I can update my estimates and update my averaging calculations. And then at some point in the future, once all those updated estimates are figured into the grand final estimate, I'll return to providing you guys with updated numbers on what we believe to be the populations living in those buckets. So with no further ado, I think this did take a little bit longer than I expected, but I wasn't quite anticipating the need to go through this material so thoroughly to haul out stragglers. But let's get this box out of our way. This will be now officially marked off in my system as complete and depopulated, although officially there's still stragglers in here, but that's fine. We're not going to make any further attempts to get them out. And now we're going to move on to the buckets and get them fed. Don't forget, please leave me a comment. Let me know how many worms we just extracted with the baiting effort here. So let's get the buckets out here and get them fed. down here in bucket number 1, you can see the assortment of stuff that I've got laid out for these worms. It's just a variety of all kinds of stuff. There's mushroom, there's, what is it, squash, there's even onion in here, one of the forbidden foods that a lot of people don't like to put in their worm bins. I'm not so superstitious. But the one thing that I thought I would really quickly draw everyone's attention to is the presence of a whole bunch of stems of peppers. There's a whole bunch of them in here, but they're down low and I don't want to pick through the whole stack, but you get the idea. The one obvious thing though is the absence of any seeds, and that's because I've been putting a lot of the pepper seeds that I have lately aside. As you can see, my little collection of pepper seeds is growing. I wanted to start incorporating pepper seeds into my worm chow mix the next time I whip up a batch, so I thought it'd be nice to hang on to pepper seeds as long as peppers are, you know, kind of a popular thing around here. I'm constantly eating peppers. I got peppers out in the garden, and it always seems like all the seeds that I chuck out into the compost barrel would probably be useful in my worm chow mix. I'm using all kinds of other seeds. Why not use pepper seeds? Because they are quite abundant. Now, I don't want to make this video go much longer. It seems like we did spend a fair bit of time hauling out stragglers, a little bit more than I expected to do, but that's okay. We're just going to try to speed up the feeding and release of the worms. As I mentioned here, bucket number 1 is where we're going to be releasing the hauled out stragglers. Here's a little pumpkin stem even. Must have come along for the ride when we launched off the system. But since the amount of food that I did come down here with for them is abundant, I feel like I need to create a fairly decent sized hole into which we can place the feeding. And I've even got my bedding on the side, but since this release of worms is going to go hand in hand with a fairly good amount of crumpled up newspaper and chunks of cardboard, I thought that we would simply use the worm release as the supplement to the bedding in here today, and then when we get over to bucket number 2, where we're not releasing any worms, we'll just use some of my prepared bedding to compensate for, you know, keeping things fair and even in terms of applying bedding to both systems in a consistent and even fashion. So let's not dawdle. Let's go ahead and start piling in some of this delicious food. I guess I'm going to go by handfuls here. It feels like this is about 1 handful, and it seems to me like if I were to grab just a second handful, then that should get us to about that halfway mark. This is definitely a somewhat more generous feeding than what we gave them 9 days ago. Let's just give them one more small little pinch, because it did seem to me like they got some stems of beets and a couple other greens, maybe some parsley or whatever it was, but it wasn't a lot. So I wanted to go pretty generous, and this is a pretty good amount of stuff. So I've got a replacement top covering too, so this remnant of the top covering can go back in. What I figured we would use as the top covering would be our little piece of paper on which we've got the annotation of the number of worms being released. So before we can put the top covering on though, we've got to level things off and release the worms, right? So let's get things level. I can go grab the bait station, and then we can have our little reunion of the worms that came out of the finished compost and get them over here into bucket number 1. Okay, ready or not, here we come. It looks like it's going to be close, but it does seem like this container should just barely fit in here, so we can do the flip over and release. And I'll take a quick look at this bait box just to make sure we haven't left any worms behind, but at this point it's time to reunite the wormies with their family. So let's give these little guys a moment to settle in. This is just gonna be our, I guess, last glimpse at to how many worms we've released, to give ourselves a sense of how many there were. So I, once again, do look forward to seeing everyone's comments on how many worms we're releasing into bucket number 1 here, so that I can include those in the averaging calculations. Please leave a comment. Alright, I did manage to find just a small number of worms remaining in our bait station here. I just dislodged a couple chunks of castings, and within a couple of the chunks of castings I found perhaps 5 or 6 worms. I wanted to get them in here too, but I think at this point we've pretty thoroughly examined the bait box and removed all the worms. Now, before we cover up and put away over here in box number 1, I wanted to kind of make the top surface a little bit interesting, so that maybe they come up and nibble on some of this paper and cardboard that was thrown in here along with the worms. So I wanted to coat the top surface here with a little bit of my worm chow, and then we can come in with the top covering paper, and on top of that the plastic bubble wrap coating, topping, whatever you want to call it. Then we can get on to bucket number 2. Alrighty. Now, bucket number 2, I'd like to try to pick up the pace. Here we have no worms to release. It's just a matter of getting them fed. We'll just throw in a little bit of my prepared bedding at the end as a top coating, sort of, and then treat that with a little bit of worm chow too. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what people think. I've already started kind of formulating a little bit of a guess now that we've had a chance to observe the worms that we removed from the castings and released them into their new home and reunited them with the rest of their family. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what everyone has to say in the comments with regards to the number of worms that we just released over into bucket number 1. So bucket number 2 here looks very similar in terms of the castings that are piling up, which does seem to be significant. There's a good number of castings starting to pile up in these systems. Considering they're only 21 days of age, it does seem like they're kind of in high gear and moving fast. But then again, with the number of worms living in these systems, it's not terribly surprising that they're doing a number on the bedding. And, you know, being African nightcrawlers, they are the type of worm that does tend to do a number on their bedding. So I think we've created a large enough void here, which will be sufficient for us to plop in the remainder of the food that we bought down here for them. See a little bit of pepper seed here still remaining. I'm tempted just to let this container sit out here and dry off so I can claim those last few bits of pepper seed for my collection. Let's drop in a little bit of pulverized eggshell as grit. Gotta remember, did we put any down into the feeding area of bucket number 1? I think we did, but I don't remember now. My memory's not what it used to be. And then we can backfill and plop in a little bit of supplementary bedding just to be fair. To me, it seemed like the amount of stuff that was in the bait box was perhaps a handful or 2 worth of crumbled up newspaper and cardboard, so I figured if we were to come in here with about 2 handfuls of my prepared bedding, then that should get us back into sync for the most part. So all that remains now is to similarly top coat with some worm chow so that hopefully the worms will come out and start doing a number on this material out on top. And I believe by having a plastic top, we do create a good bit of moisture beneath its surface, and that tends to bring the worms out. So that's it for our video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. Please also don't forget to leave a comment. I'm looking forward to everyone's input, and we'll see you next time. Oh yeah, besides giving me a thumbs up, if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.